The end of the line. Deadheading. The 12:05 a.m. out of Union Station wasn't a train. It was a broom. It swept the city's leftovers toward the suburbs, the drunks sobering up, the second-shift nurses with swollen ankles, and the kids who'd missed the last bus. Miller hated this run. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that drilled right behind his eyes. The air smelled of stale beer and wet wool. By the time they hit the turnaround point at Oak Park, the cars were mostly empty. Miller walked the aisle, punching the seatbacks, checking for sleepers. He found the guy in the third car, seat 12A. Same guy as Tuesday, same guy as Monday. He looked like he'd been wearing his suit for 3 days. The collar was unbuttoned. The tie loosened like a noose he couldn't quite get off. He wasn't sleeping. He was staring at his own reflection in the black window, watching the rain streak sideways. Miller stopped at the row. He didn't use his customer service voice. "End of the line, buddy. You gotta get off." The guy didn't jump. He just turned his head slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, glassy but sober. "I have a return ticket," he said. His voice was flat, like he was reading a menu. Miller looked at the ticket on the little metal clip. Monthly pass. Unlimited rides. Technically, the guy could ride until the rails rusted, but it was 1:15 a.m., and Miller wanted to sit in the cab and eat his sandwich without an audience. "We sit here for 20 minutes before the turnaround," Miller said, shifting his weight. "Lights go off, HVAC goes down, it gets cold." "I don't mind the cold," the guy said. He turned back to the window. Miller stood there for a second, looking at the scuff marks on the guy's expensive loafers. He sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet car. "Suit yourself." 2. Static Miller sat in the conductor's jump seat at the end of the car, unwrapping a turkey sub. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the emergency strips glowing blue along the floor. The rain drummed harder on the roof. He heard the rustle of fabric. The guy had moved across the aisle, closer to Miller. Not right next to him, that would be weird, but close enough to be a presence. "You got a light?" the guy asked. "No smoking on the train," Miller said automatically. Then he patted his breast pocket. "But we aren't moving." He tossed a cheap Bic lighter and a pack of Camels across the gap. The flame flared, illuminating the guy's face, deep lines around the mouth, unshaven jaw. "I tried to go home yesterday," the guy said. He didn't look at Miller. He watched the smoke curl up toward the dark ceiling. Miller chewed his sandwich. He learned a long time ago not to ask questions on the graveyard shift. You get answers you don't want. "The house makes this noise," the guy continued. "You know when you turn off an old TV? That high-pitched static? That's what my house sounds like. It's the silence. It's so loud it makes my teeth hurt." Miller swallowed. He knew that sound. He heard it for 6 months after his divorce, until he bought a radio and left it on NPR 24/7. "Wife?" Miller asked. One word. "Aneurysm," the guy said. "Tuesday. She was making coffee. Then she wasn't." Miller nodded. He took a drag from his own cigarette. The smoke hung in the cold air between them. "Coffee," Miller repeated. "Jesus." "I can't open the front door," the guy said. "I stand on the porch, keys in my hand, but I can't turn the lock. Because if I go in and she's not there, then it's real. As long as I'm on this train, moving, it's just a bad day at work. I can pretend she's waiting up." The train gave a sudden lurch, the hydraulic brakes settling. "You can't live on the Metro North, pal," Miller said. "I tried living in my car in '08. It doesn't work. You just get stinkier and sadder." The guy gave a short, dry laugh. "I know. What's your name? David. All right, David. Here's the deal. We leave in 10. I'm taking this train back to the city. Then I'm going home to feed my cat and pass out. You can ride back with me. But tomorrow night, if I see you in seat 12A, I'm kicking you off. Physically. David looked at him. Why? Because you're depressing me, Miller said. And I got enough problems. 3. The platform. The ride back to the city was a blur of passing streetlights. David fell asleep, head against the vibrating glass. Miller let him sleep until they hit the suburb where David had gotten on. Arlington Heights. Miller walked over and kicked the bottom of David's shoe. Wake up. This is you. David jerked awake, looking around wildly for a second before the reality settled back onto his face. The slump returned to his shoulders. The train slowed. The brakes squealed. A high metal shriek. I don't think I can do it, David whispered. Miller didn't offer a pep talk. He didn't put a hand on David's shoulder. He pressed the button that opened the side doors. A gust of wet, freezing wind swept into the car, smelling of wet asphalt and ozone. Get up, Miller said. David stood up. His legs looked shaky. He walked to the open door and stared out at the empty concrete platform. The rain was coming down in sheets now. It's just a house, David, Miller said from behind him. It's just wood and drywall. It doesn't bite. It's empty, David said. Yeah, Miller said. It is, and it's going to stay empty until you put your ass inside it. The conductor checked his watch. I got a schedule to keep. You get off, or I push you. David turned and looked at Miller. For the first time, there was something alive in his eyes. Maybe anger, maybe fear. But it was better than the dead stare. You're a prick, David said. I'm a conductor, Miller replied. Step off. David stepped onto the platform. The wind hit him, whipping his coat around his legs. He looked small under the harsh halogen lights. Miller didn't wait for a wave or a thank you. He hit the button. The doors hissed shut, sealing the warmth back inside. As the train pulled away, gathering speed, Miller looked back. David was still standing there, getting soaked, staring at the street that led to his house. Then he turned his collar up, put his hands in his pockets, and started walking toward the exit. Miller turned back to the empty car. He sat down, opened his thermos, and poured the last of the coffee. Coffee, he muttered to himself. Jesus. He took a sip and watched the dark world rush by. I fool. The static, the walk took 11 minutes. David counted the steps to keep his mind from running ahead of his feet. The rain had soaked through the shoulders of his suit coat, making the wool heavy and smelling of wet dog. The house sat on a corner lot, a colonial with peeling white paint on the trim. It looked dark, not just unlit, but dead, like a skull sitting on the lawn. David stood on the porch mat. It said welcome in fading choir bristles. He fished the keys from his pocket. His hands were numb, clumsy. He dropped the keys once. They clattered on the wood, loud as a gunshot in the suburban quiet. He picked them up. Just wood and drywall, the conductor had said. David slid the brass key into the deadbolt. It stuck. It always stuck. You had to jiggle it up and to the left. He did it automatically, muscle memory overriding the panic. The tumblers clicked. He pushed the door open. The air inside was stagnant. It hit him like a physical wall. It didn't smell like lemon pledge or cookies. It smelled of closed windows, dust, and something sharp and bitter. Coffee. He stepped inside and didn't turn on the lights. The street lamps outside cast long, warped parallelograms across the hardwood floor. The silence was there, The static. It wasn't a noise. It was a pressure. It pressed against his eardrums, filling the space where her voice used to be, where the TV used to be, where the dog's nails clicking on the floor used to be. David walked to the kitchen. He didn't take off his coat. He was dripping water onto the floor she used to polish every Saturday, and he didn't care. On the counter, the French press sat where she'd left it Tuesday morning. He looked at it. The grounds were still in the bottom. A puck of dark, green, fuzzy mold had started to form on the glass. He stared at the mold. It was ugly. It was real. It was decomposing, just like everything else. David reached out and grabbed the handle. His hand was shaking so bad the glass rattled against the granite counter. "Okay," he said to the empty room. His voice cracked. "Okay." He carried the press to the sink. He turned on the faucet. The pipes groaned, then water sputtered out, brown at first, then clear. He dumped the moldy grounds into the disposal and hit the switch. The disposal roared, a violent mechanical grinding that tore through the silence. It was the loudest sound in the world. David leaned over the sink, gripping the porcelain edge, and listened to the machine chew up the past. He didn't cry. He just breathed, in and out, listening to the disposal until the drain was clear. Then he turned it off. The silence rushed back in, but it felt different now, lighter. He took off his wet coat and threw it on the chair. Tuesday again, 2 weeks later. Miller was working a double shift because the new guy, Kowalski, had called in sick with food poisoning, which Miller knew meant a hangover. The 12:05 a.m. was lighter than usual. A couple of college kids arguing about a movie, a sleeping nurse, and a homeless guy. Miller had to wake up at every stop to make sure he wasn't ODing. The train rattled toward Arlington Heights. Miller felt the familiar itch of routine. He walked through the third car. He looked at seat 12A. Empty. Miller paused for a second, checking the overhead rack, checking the floor. Nothing. Just gray fabric and a gum wrapper. The train began to slow. "Arlington Heights," the automated voice announced. Miller stepped out onto the vestibule and opened the doors. He leaned out, scanning the platform. It was dry tonight. The air was crisp. 3 people got off. A teenager with a skateboard, the nurse, and a guy in a windbreaker carrying a gym bag. Miller watched them go. He didn't see the suit. He didn't see the loafers. He waited until the platform was clear. He looked toward the parking lot stairs. Nothing. Miller stepped back inside and keyed the mic. "Doors closing," he said. As the train pulled away, Miller sat in the jump seat and opened his lunchbox. Ham and Swiss tonight. He took a bite and looked at the empty seat across the aisle. "Good," Miller said to the air. He chewed, swallowed, and turned the page of his newspaper. The train picked up speed, heading toward the end of the line, carrying only the people who still needed to go somewhere. 6. The 7:14 a.m. inbound April came in wet and gray, turning the track ballast into mud. Miller was on the morning rotation now. Punishment for arguing with a supervisor about overtime pay. He hated the mornings. The 7:14 a.m. wasn't a broom. It was a cattle car. The car was packed shoulder to shoulder. It smelled of wet umbrellas, cheap cologne, and desperate caffeine consumption. No silence here. Just the roar of 100 private conversations and the tinny bleed of headphones. Miller squeezed through the aisle, shouting, "Tickets!" over the noise. He hated this part. In the morning, nobody wanted to look at him. He was just an obstacle between them and their cubicles. He reached the middle of the 4th car. A man in a beige trench coat was blocking the aisle, reading a Kindle. "Excuse me," Miller grunted, trying to squeeze past. The man turned. It was David. Miller stopped. The crowd pushed against his back, grumbling, but he held his ground. David looked different. Shaved, his hair was cut short, the suit was pressed. He didn't look happy. Nobody looks happy on the 714 to the city. But he looked solid. He looked like part of the herd. David looked up and saw Miller. For a second, the noise of the train seemed to drop away. Miller expected a speech, or maybe that awkward look people give when they owe you money or a secret. David just blinked. Then he nodded. A small, sharp dip of the chin. "Conductor," David said. Miller adjusted his cap. "Ticket?" David tapped his phone against the scanner on Miller's belt. Beep. Valid. "Moving slow this morning," Miller said. It was the only olive branch he knew how to offer. "Rain," David said. "Signals are wet near Des Plaines." "Always are?" Miller said. "Excuse me," a woman behind Miller snapped. "Some of us have to work." Miller stepped aside. "Have a good one," Miller said to David. "You too, Miller," David said. Miller pushed forward into the crush of bodies. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The guy was just another commuter now, just another suit worrying about being late. And that was the best-case scenario. 7. Static. Reprise. Miller's shift ended at 2 p.m. at Union Station. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, glaring off the puddles in the rail yard. He walked to his car, an 09 Ford that smelled like old fast food wrappers. He drove 40 minutes out to a duplex in a neighborhood that was neither good nor bad, just there. He unlocked his front door. "Hey," he said to the empty room. Barnaby, a one-eared tomcat Miller had pulled out of a wheel well 3 years ago, jumped off the sofa and meowed. It sounded like a rusty hinge. Miller threw his keys in the bowl. He took off his uniform jacket and hung it on the hook. The house was quiet. Miller stood in the living room. He listened. He could hear the fridge humming. He could hear the neighbor's lawnmower 2 doors down. He could hear the traffic on the interstate, a low, steady ocean sound. It wasn't silence. It was just quiet. He walked to the kitchen and opened a can of tuna for the cat. He cracked a beer for himself. He leaned against the counter and took a long sip. He thought about David, probably sitting in a meeting right now, or staring at a spreadsheet, or maybe thinking about his wife, or maybe not. Miller looked at the cat eating the tuna. "You know," Miller said to the cat, "I think I'm going to paint the fence this weekend." The cat ignored him. Miller took another sip of beer. It tasted cold and bitter and good. He wasn't going anywhere. He was the guy who rode back and forth. He was the guy who kept the doors open, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Miller turned on the radio. The Cubs game was starting. The static crackled for a second, then cleared into the sound of a cheering crowd. We all ride the loop sometimes. If you know someone who's staring at their reflection in a dark window, pass this on. Or don't. Just make sure you get off at your stop.